All right, everyone. I'd like to continue the program. We're pretty much right on schedule. So we're going to break for lunch now, but I was recently introduced to a very fine gentleman who has a lot of insight to share with us. The next session, we're going to squeeze into our lunch break, is Lawfare. We learned a little bit about Lawfare already, but we have another perspective, and there's so many Lawfare attacks going on against Republicans that different perspectives are very helpful. So speaking on this subject is Jason Goodman, who is the host of Crowdsource the Truth. He's very active in educating the public about the ills, harms that lawfare causes, and he has a lot to share with us. So I'm going to make you the presenter, Jason, and I need to pull up the presentation. Okay, so I have your presentation. I can move the slides for you if you'd like.
Okay. Is there any way for me to control the slides or not from this end? It's all right. I wanted to give this presentation, David, because, you know, so many people hear this term lawfare and they don't even know what it is. Now, it's important at the outset that I alert your audience that I am not an attorney. I've never been to law school. I don't practice law outside of my own pro se defense, but I've been sort of involuntarily forced to become maybe the nation's most prolific counter lawfare practitioner, and I've been forced to learn quite a lot about it. We can go to the next slide, please. Lawfare, the term was coined by this guy, Charles Dunlop. He's a retired Major General from the U.S. Air Force, and he was a JAG officer. Today, he is a law professor at Duke. And he specializes in national security law. They host all kinds of events that help students understand how they can join the CIA and stuff like that. I'm not making that up. You look on the Duke website, they have all kinds of things about careers in the intelligence agencies. And of course, we do need people in our intelligence agencies. But I became interested in Mr. Dunlap when I started learning about lawfare. He says it's the strategic use of law to achieve a military or political objective. So this is not just a buzzword on Fox News or a talking point from Donald Trump. Dunlop refers to it as a 21st century method of warfare. Now, it's my opinion that it blurs the lines between legal advocacy and manipulation of the law because it's often used to intimidate or exhaust opponents. Now, in the context of international law, where it is being applied as a warfare mechanism, perhaps that's all right. But I want to explore a little bit how these military tactics and these intelligence tactics have crossed over into civilian life. So there's another guy who writes a lot about lawfare, and he's on the next slide. He is Ord Kittry. Now, I actually didn't even know about Ord Kittry until I began to prepare this presentation. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. I love these names of these nonprofit organizations because, I mean, we're talking to a group of lawyers here, so I can already tell there's going to be people in the audience who are drilling in to what is the legal definition of a democracy? What exactly is this thing defending? But that's another topic for another talk. Mr. Kittry is a senior fellow there at the foundation. He's also a professor of law at Arizona State University in the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. He spent 11 years in the U.S. State Department. I couldn't exactly nail this time frame down, but it appears to be approximately from 1990 to 2001. A lot of people think the State Department is also the CIA. You might not be one of those people. But Mr. Kittry specialized in UN Security Council resolutions and executive orders that imposed embargoes on outlaw regimes. Again, one person's outlaw regime is another person's freedom fighter. I'm not suggesting that I support terrorism in any way, but I think we're starting to understand in 2024. We just had a presenter speaking about January 6th. That's a very important topic, particularly for attorneys who are defending American citizens who might have been invited through an open door by police officers who are now being categorized as terrorists, perhaps in the same category as these alleged outlaw regimes. I don't know, not the subject of this talk, but Mr. Kittrey is a renowned expert on international law, and there is a legitimate place for lawfare and certainly counter lawfare against our enemies on the international stage. On the next slide, we have Ord Kittrey's book, Lawfare, which also refers to it as a weapon of war. I haven't completed this book yet. I did start reading it, and it's clear that Kittrey's point of view comes at this from the perspective of the International Criminal Court, the fact that, there is still something of a Wild West environment on the international stage. We don't have an international governing body that presides over nations exactly. I mean, we've got the UN, et cetera, but this book and Mr. Kittrey are very interested in the legal aspects of that. Next slide, please. The thing that's interesting about the book is that the foreword is written by James Woolsey. I don't know if people are familiar with Woolsey. He's the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He had a very controversial tenure at the CIA. He presided over one of the biggest espionage scandals in the agency's history. Aldrich Ames was arrested while Woolsey was in charge of the CIA, and there were a lot of questions as to why Woolsey didn't find out about this sooner. He basically, I don't know if he left in disgrace, but he's not the most popular or highly regarded CIA director, former CIA director. He's very prolific in his post-intelligence career, or if this is a post-intelligence career, he's very prolific in the nonprofit world of non-government organizations. I have a list of some of these. The next slide shows us that Woolsey is the, next slide, please. He's the chairman of the board of this foundation for the defense of democracies, and very likely that's how he came to know Kittrey and wrote the foreword for his book. He also is a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, where I believe the director is, or was at one time, Anthony Schaefer, who famously was kind of a whistleblower after 9/11. He was in charge of a CIA operation that was supposedly tracking the terrorists, Muhammad Atta and all of these guys. And basically Schaefer's message was, we need more open communication between the CIA, our intelligence gathering agency, and the FBI, sort of a national law enforcement agency at the time. He wanted to break down those barriers. Woolsey is also a board member at the United States Energy Security Council, and he's a former chairman of the board of trustees of that. On the next slide, we continue to observe that he also is an advisor about energy security at the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security. He's also involved, or was, this has been defunct, the Project for the New American Century. People who aren't familiar with that, I would recommend research it. This was a neocon think tank. Paul Wolfowitz, and we had a lot of guys in there. The names, how could they escape me? The Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. These were all sort of George Bush neocons created this thing, and they had written a paper also called the Project for a New American Century, which determined that, as the 1990s were drawing to a close and the new millennium was upon us, and perestroika had happened, the Soviet Union had been disbanded. The goal of the PNAC was to project American power throughout the globe such that no military or financial superpower on the order of the USSR could rise to challenge the US. And it comes right out and says that the United States public would need something to galvanize the spirit, something on the order of a new, event along the lines of Pearl Harbor. Shortly after that publication, of course, we had 9/11. Mr. Woolsey is also the former vice chairman of the Jamestown Foundation. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the last slide here of his credentials that is perhaps most interesting, the next slide, is he is a strategic advisor and a board member on Genie Energy, which is not a government agency. It's not a nonprofit. That is a for-profit energy company that's primarily focused on exploiting assets in the Golan Heights. This is all information that's come from his own Wikipedia. He is also a board of advisors member in the Global panel foundations supporting crisis management and diplomacy in conflict zones. So this is quite a broad resume for Mr. Woolsey. It's interesting to see how he has run the gamut from government agencies to nonprofit agencies to for-profit agencies. Next slide, please. I think a lot of lawfare practitioners do that. It's something I think that honest practitioners should watch out for. Now, the Lawfare Institute is something that a lot of lawyers may have heard of. Maybe you even watch their podcasts. Ben Wittes is one of the founders of this thing. He does a lot of podcasting. This is primarily a media organization. Ben Wittes is not an attorney as far as I know. He does have a lot of legal experience, a lot of journalism and legal writing experience. They want you to know that hard national security choices are being made and that it was founded September 1st, 2010. 2010. That's their Facebook page. On the next slide, we're going to go a little bit more into the Lawfare Foundation. It's had a bunch of different directors. This is David Priest. He has been a fellow at the Brookings Institution and things like that. This is from his X account. He used to like to hang out with George H.W. Bush, who was also a director of the CIA at one point. Priest tells us that he's former CIA and currently the director of intelligence at Bedrock SAS. So somebody's using software as a service, needs CIA people working there. On the next slide, David Priest wrote a book. This is actually a very interesting book. I'm loath to promote the books of people whose agendas I question as deeply as I do Mr. Priest's, but this is an extremely interesting book, How to Get Rid of a President. So, you know, I didn't name it that, he did. It's an interesting exploration into the history of impeachments and near impeachments of presidents. When I bought and read this book, I did not know that there were as many impeachments or near impeachments. You know, we've always heard it was like Andrew Jackson, Bill Clinton, and then Donald Trump. This book describes how almost every single president that we've had, there's been one faction or one group or another that's wanted to get rid of them in some way. And my takeaway from this is that there's a certain group of people, perhaps bureaucrats in Washington, who like the notion of an incompetent executive. And this book describes how to get rid of one. Next slide, please. Priest is no longer the director of the Lawfare Institute. It is now, again, Benjamin Wittes. Benjamin Wittes, on the next slide, we can see has recently had his Twitter account, his X account. There he is, wearing one of his dog shirts. I think the next slide I show how his Twitter account has been suspended. This is a video. Are we able to play this video?
I don't see anywhere for me to click on it to activate it.
In the lower left, there should be, if you just click right on the CR in Crowdsource, I think it should start it playing if this is the PowerPoint presentation. If not, that's fine. Okay, so people can go to X and follow me at JG, like Jason Goodman, _ CSTT, Crowdsource the Truth. This is Ben Wittes leaving the Trump trial in New York City, where Juan Merchan was presiding over the trial. I didn't even know he was there. I just happened to be down at the courthouse covering this trial, and Ben Wittes walked out. I asked him a bunch of very pointed questions. People will enjoy that video. I really encourage people to take a look at it. On the next slide, we can see that Mr. Wittes, even though he's a media figure and a journalist, now his X account has been suspended. A lot of times people, particularly if they view the establishment as trying to suppress the truth, they might see this as a badge of honor. Maybe Ben Wittes is such an honest journalist that he's been banned from mainstream outlets, including X. If we go to the next slide, we can see that that's not the case. This was deliberately done by Ben Wittes. He's got his dog shirt, I pronounce that very carefully in public, his dog shirt daily Substack, where he talks about how his Twitter account has been suspended. He describes on April 1st that he decided to execute a prank. He had observed that this other Twitter account, Pawn All the Things, and for the hacker lawyers among us, you'll know that pawn refers to personally owning something. When you're a hacker, you take ownership of it. So Matt Tate controls the Twitter account Pawn All the Things. Ben Wittes is aware of that. Matt Tate is also a contributor to Lawfare, but Ben describes in this Substack post how he deliberately masqueraded his account. Let's go to the next slide. he deliberately masqueraded the Twitter account to impersonate, here's Matt Tate. He's a former GCHQ officer. He's pretty young to retire from the intelligence world. So maybe he retired. I don't know. Now he is the CEO, or excuse me, the chief technology officer of something called Corellium, which Matt would have you believe is a tool to help people identify exploits in iPhone operating systems. I think Apple might differ. There was a lawsuit that alleged that this was a tool explicitly created to hack the iPhone. I don't know. People would have to look at that evidence and form their own conclusions. But on the next slide, Ben explains how Matt had masqueraded his account as the Russian embassy in the United States to put out, information that was deliberately not coming from the Russian embassy in the United States. So I don't know if people think that's disinformation, but it's strange to me that a journalist and a media-focused individual would deliberately suicide a 409,000 strong Twitter account, an X account that's a big media asset that he pushed over the ledge that I'm sure had nothing to do with the lawsuit that I had against him at the time. That's another conversation for another discussion, another day. But on the next slide, we can see Mr. Witties is also a fellow, or has been in the past, at Brookings. The Lawfare Institute is very closely tied to the Brookings Institution. And James Comey is admittedly close friends with Ben Witties. We won't be able to play this video either, but on the next slide, we have a still frame from a video of this meeting, which James Comey, people can still find this on the Brookings Institution YouTube channel. James Comey says that the Lawfare Institute blog is his favorite blog. He's excited to be part of a podcast. He looks at the thing every day. And that is in addition to, on the next slide, we can see an email sent from Ben Witties to James Comey in December of 2016, after Donald Trump has won. And this is talking about a very strange document that crossed Ben Witties' desk that may or may not have implications for investigations you guys, the FBI, are conducting. I'm reading this email to everyone because this is a component of lawfare. Lawfare is not just some, irascible plaintiff who is bringing vexatious litigation against a client to annoy them or harass them or get money from them. Complex litigation emerges from lawfare, and as we heard from the progenitors of it, this is a mechanism of war. This is, if you want to assassinate a president, you can get a guy up on a roof in Butler, Pennsylvania, allegedly, and fire shots at him, or you can try it like this. But this email is describing a document that is supposedly, according to Mr. Witties, created by a private British intelligence firm. This document doesn't describe that Matt Tate also operated a private British intelligence firm called Capital Alpha Security. And remember, this email is coming months after the Christopher Steele dossier, so he couldn't be talking about Orbis Intelligence, which is the private intelligence firm controlled by Steele. So it's interesting. I think lawyers and FBI agents know that when you write things in emails, they become discoverable. So is this email a component of lawfare? I don't know. This is public domain evidence. We can see it's Bates stamped from the Senate Homeland Security and Government Accountability Committee. So they believe it's evidence. I think we have some more slides here. There might be one last slide. Right. Because you see, what I allege is that it is a component in the lawfare campaign that I detailed in a report also on my X account at JG_CSTT that I've titled The Twitter Coup, that talks about how, again, private industry, just like we saw James Woolsey, he's an advisor to energy companies while he's also simultaneously on the board of these nonprofit things. That's it for the slides. And it's just interesting to see how these individuals straddle the world of government and law and private industry. Of course, a lot of them, those with Juris Doctor degrees, are going to go from being maybe U.S. attorneys, maybe DOJ attorneys, to then being in private practice. We know that's what happened with Christopher Wray. I believe he was a partner at, is it King Spalding? Definitely the attorneys in the audience will know better than me, but it's interesting to go from such a high paying and high-powered position at a major law firm to earn just six figures. Obviously, the director of the FBI, it's a powerful position, but I just wonder, again, some of this is my opinion. What I've shared today, public domain facts and evidence. Some people might look at that evidence and draw different conclusions than I have. David, I don't know if we have time or interest in questions or comments, but I think I've got a bit of time left there, and people can go watch those videos on my X channel at JG_CSTT.
So, okay, thank you very much for speaking to us today. We do have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand and I can take you off of mute. But I guess, maybe this is at a very intellectual level, just trying to distill it down to what evil did these people that you showed us in your presentation, what evil did they commit against, let's say, Republican office seekers, Republican candidates, maybe just distill in very layman's terms.
Sure. I allege on information and belief based on that public domain evidence, my conclusions, my opinion, that Benjamin Wittes, James Comey, what's his name, that guy from Ukraine, Vindman, he was paid over $300,000 by the Lawfare Institute. There's no evidence that he ever worked 40 hours per week there, as reported on the public IRS 990 filings. But these individuals, I allege, were behind the entire Lawfare campaign against Donald Trump from the time he was a candidate in 2016, the creation and dissemination of the Steele dossier, other components of that. There's an individual named Peter Smith that was involved very early in trying to entrap some of the people that were around Donald Trump. When that failed, that email that I showed you went from Ben Wittes to James Comey. That triggered this Crossfire hurricane investigation. You might recall that John Durham, he conducted an investigation that had involved a criminal prosecution of an attorney for the Hillary Clinton campaign named, I believe, Sussman. In that Sussman trial, there was a witness who was a former FBI general counsel named Jim Baker. Now, we don't really know what happened with regard to Jim Baker. A lot of that stuff is under seal. And Jim Baker left the FBI rather abruptly after that trial, and he went to work for Twitter, where he was then fired by Elon Musk for his direct involvement in suppressing information having to do with the Hunter Biden laptop. People also saw that graphic that I showed for the Twitter coup report, which shows Barack Obama and a little-known individual named Adam Sharp, who plays an outsized role in this whole entire thing because he was, when Trump was running in 2016, he was a very important executive at Twitter. He had been there for about 6 years, and he was the first U.S. government liaison. And I further allege, as detailed in that report, I present a lot of public domain evidence that some members of the audience might agree with my conclusions or might disagree with my conclusions about that evidence, but he was responsible largely for inserting the FBI into Twitter and violating everybody's Fourth Amendment rights and First Amendment rights in ways that are now matters of public record, in part due to the testimony by Jim Baker. So I realize a lot of this sounds complicated and convoluted, and perhaps some people are rolling their eyes and saying this is a conspiracy theory, but I didn't know any of these people. I didn't know any of these facts until they trained their weapons of lawfare against me for simply being a journalist. And I learned all of these things. So again, people might review these facts and this evidence and disagree with my conclusions, but they cannot disagree with the fact that this evidence exists and it was put into the world by other people, not me.
Okay, that helps. That clarifies things. I know you're not a lawyer, but if there was incontrovertible evidence, our last speaker said the J6, people, the judges say you don't need your First Amendment rights because we have video. The speaker before that was talking about conspiracy at government organizations like the National Archives. If I had a video where a group of senior National Archives people got together, and I have a video of their conspiracy to send classified documents to Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago, can they be prosecuted? Do they have any immunity because they're government workers? what could be done in that situation?
I love that question because you're right. From a legal standpoint, I can't answer. I'm certainly not qualified to offer an answer to you and your lawyers in the audience. But from a lawfare standpoint, it's a fascinating question because you see, I think some of this abuse of Donald Trump is causing, I see it on television. Jonathan Turley, he's a Democrat, but I respect and value his opinion and I listen to what he says. I've read his books. If I were to go to law school, I would want a law professor like Jonathan Turley, and he appears dumbfounded by some of the revelations with regard to the lack of integrity in the courts. Juan Merchan and some of these other judges doing things that I think many people find to be just outright corruption. And unfortunately, that's been my experience. So to answer your question, what the law says could happen to that people and to those people, and what happens when the rubber meets the road, even in the U.S. District Court, even in the Second Circuit Court. You see, what's interesting is my Twitter coup report talks about the third leg of the stool on this Twitter infiltration team. It's Barack Obama, it's Adam Sharp, but it's also the former FBI general counsel at the time, Valerie Caproni, who today is a judge in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, and who I allege has violated the law. And I'm not just saying this here on a podcast or in a webinar. I have a pro se action in the Second Circuit that is still pending, in which the Twitter coup and all of the evidence in it, my allegations that Valerie Caproni broke the law. And by the way, they're not just my allegations. These are allegations leveled by the House Judiciary Committee. Moreover, the late John Conyers, who was the ranking member at the time, when he said the Office of the FBI General Counsel has broken the law. And he implicated Valerie Caproni, said she should be prosecuted for committing crimes. So I'm just observing that and agreeing. I believe Valerie Caproni loves to violate the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, and that Twitter was a key piece in doing that, and that the problem has not yet been rectified. So in answer to your question, David, I don't know what would happen if those are the right people who are protected by the people that I'm talking about. They might well get away with it.
Okay. Well, Jason, thank you very much for speaking to us. You added a lot of depth to the issue of lawfare, gave us a lot of good context, which is very helpful. And thank you for the good work you're doing, trying to fight the war against lawfare. We appreciate that, and we appreciate the time you spent with us.
Thank you for having me, David. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
All right, so in just a few seconds, we're going to go into our next presentation. So let me get our next esteemed speaker set up here.